return for obtaining wealth and glory. Sometimes, boxer will get beat during the fight in the ring and will become a disabled person. I have seen many friends and well experienced boxers damaged, but I don't want to end up with such a tragedy for my beloved family.
Ashita no Joe is an incredible piece of entertainment from start to finish. Main character Joe Yabuki is charismatic, memorable, and extremely talented. He fights several memorable rivals who could be main characters of their own anime, and the animation for the 1970s and 80s is extremely good. However, what I found to be the most interesting about Ashita no Joe, despite the awesome fights and brilliant animation, was its approach to the sport of boxing itself. Iki Kajiwara clearly has a love and respect for the sport of boxing, but did not shy away from its more ugly side. That line by Mexican boxer Jose Mendoza at the beginning is a great microcosm of Kajiwara's approach to the series. Ashita no Joe is a series that has more than its fair share of tragedy. Characters die, characters are changed irreversibly for the worst, almost all of which are boxing-related incidents. You may get the impression that the story is simply a warning of the dangers of boxing, but I see it as a display of the sport's duality. Boxing gives and boxing takes. Now, that idea is not exclusive to boxing. We all know sports like American football, ice hockey, and rugby have a heavy reliance on physical contact, and can take great tolls on its players. And even sports without the overt physical emphasis like soccer, basketball, and baseball can be quite taxing on a player's body either due to specific incidents or through long-term wear and tear of a long career. However, there are few sports where such dualities exist more than in combat sports. Sports where two people literally have the singular objective of beating another more efficiently or making the other capitulate. While the series focuses solely on boxing, its message can be applied to sports in general. That message being, professional sports is a double-edged sword. I want to emphasize the point double-edged, meaning there is great good and great risk. Boxing is no exception. Now, many would be inclined to see things like boxing and MMA as a brutish sport of unfeeling strongmen, where whoever is stronger and more resilient wins. For a long time, even I held that erroneous view about combat sports. It was actually Hajime no Ippo and Teppu that made me truly reevaluate that stance and see the appeal, emotion, and positivity that those sports can bring, despite their physically brutal nature. Ashita no Joe, however, is a series that really thrives on portraying the duality of the sport of boxing, showcasing how it can both make and break a person simultaneously. Initially, Yabuki Joe is a homeless wanderer with no family, no friends, and no occupation. By coincidence, he ran into Tange Danpei, a former boxer himself who saw great potential in Joe, and through a combination of natural talent and hard work, Joe became, albeit through trial and error, a pro boxer. The path to that pro license was an interesting one. The directionless and indifferent Joe, who showed no reverence for his elders or any authorities, started off trying to play Danpei for a fool, and continuously pissing off Shiraki Yoko and the police, and manipulating children to do his bidding. This seemingly hopeless lifestyle naturally led him to prison, where he experienced the worst society had to offer. But one man's coincidental presence sparked a change. Rikishi Toru, a former boxer, foiled Joe's first escape attempt, and as the first person his age who could seriously stand up to him in a one-on-one fight, and as someone who took very little of Joe's bullshit, Joe finally had a frenemy. Not exactly a friend, and not purely a rival. Rikishi's strength and composure deep down had won Joe's admiration. He simultaneously wanted to defeat Rikishi at boxing and looked up to Rikishi at the same time. Joe had never had a person in his life who he wanted to reach, nor did he ever have a person he so respected. He began to take Danpei's boxing lessons seriously. Joe finally had a purpose in life. He had something to aspire to for the first time, because of a boxer by the name of Rikishi Toru. Joe's embrace of boxing quickly turned his life around. He started to form an inseparable bond with Nishi, who he had initially been so at odds with at the start, He returned to the slums and found several people wishing for his success who valued him as a person and as a member of the community, who cheered him on for everything he did. In a few quick months, because of him embracing the sport of boxing and his ambition to defeat Rikishi, Joe's life turned around. There were people who truly saw worth in him for the first time. This is beautifully punctuated by the scene where people throw a party for Joe, and Joe quietly cries in joy over the realization that there were now so many people who had truly cared about him. In this case, boxing was a big reason this turnaround happened, and Joe's story mirrors the many historical and current examples of athletes who escaped a life of poverty and/or destitution through sport. However, as quickly as sport made his life, it was able to break him as he got consumed by it. Initially, he was an indirect victim. His fateful fight with Rikishi ended in Rikishi's victory, but Joe's punch was the final domino in Rikishi's self-destructive path to death. While Joe was not the sole reason, as Rikishi had starved and dehydrated himself down to Joe's weight class, Joe felt like he was the reason, as his punch sent Rikishi fatally crashing to the ground, and Rikishi's whole weight loss regimen was to be able to fight Joe in the first place. It was later revealed that Joe's fight against Wolf Kaneguchi beforehand had left Wolf with a broken jaw, forcing him to retire. This all took its toll hard on Joe, whose guilt left him unable to fight properly and made him start wandering again. The sport of boxing had took the very same man it had gave to Joe to turn his life around, seeming to set Joe back to zero. However, the connections Joe made through boxing came through for him, as the ultra-influential Shiraki Yoko, who had gradually started to respect Joe, flew in the brilliant Carlos Rivera to give him a new rival and a new spark to his career once more. Rivera's boxing skill and intuition once again gave Joe a goal and helped him get back on track. Once again, through boxing, Joe was able to set himself up with fame, respect, and money. However, boxing's great trade-off had taken its toll again. After Joe's initial traumas with Wolf and Rikishi, he had become desensitized to his own destructive potential and misfortune. He was certainly upset over Carlos's sudden retirement, which initially seemed like Joe's fault, but it did not hit him nearly as hard as it may have before. Joe quickly got back to boxing, and further incidents such as the retirement of Ryu-Hee Kim and the death of Leon Smiley had little to no effect on him. Joe had immense talent, respect, and fame, and a good stream of money. But in return, he had to accept the prospect of death, abrupt retirement, and debilitating injuries as just a part of the job. And despite Joe soldiering on through these incidents to get himself a world title fight against the esteemed Jose Mendoza, which skyrocketed his popularity even more, it did not come without a cost. The delirious, punch-drunk state of Carlos Rivera after his fight with Yabuki was a daunting foreshadowing of what was to come. Boxers like Carlos and Joe, who take a lot of damage to get their victories, run the risk of permanently damaging themselves mentally. Joe had shown many signs of punch-drunk syndrome, and by the time he had got into the ring with Mendoza, even if Yabuki had won, he wouldn't have held it for long, as his body surely would have regressed past the point of no return, as the punch-drunkenness would have taken Joe's mental state and his mobility to a point where he could hardly be recognized as the great Joe Yabuki. However, this great trade-off of physical and mental stability for success was not exclusive to Yabuki in the series. Now, in real life, the greatest long-term sports players, past and present, are usually those who put their entire being into that sport. Those who dedicate every waking moment to the honing of their craft. Players who rely solely on natural talent do appear and succeed, but they seldom last awfully long. Relying only on natural talent is almost never a recipe for longevity. The greatest sportsmen and women who were top class for the majority of their careers are those who lived, ate, and breathed their sports, who treated it like a science, who trained the longest and dedicated the most thought to said sport. Of course, those top-class athletes run the risk of physical and mental ruin. Physical ruin, meaning their overexertions, may get them permanently hurt or worse, and mental being that they may lose more and more of themselves as they get consumed by the pursuit of greatness in their sport. Sports, like any kind of career work, can take its toll on the mind if you get over-enveloped in it. Of course, it's only a possibility and not an inevitability. There are tons of great athletes who have gotten through life just fine despite their exertions and increased media attention. This great trade-off of sports is not always guaranteed. But Ashita no Joe presents us cases in which the best and worst of a boxer's trials are put on display. Joe is not the only case. Rikishi became so enveloped in his rivalry with Joe that he quite literally starved himself to death. Carlos's gung-ho style of boxing resulted in his punch-drunkenness. Leon Smiley was so absorbed in thought about boxing that he ended up zoning out and getting in a car crash. and Jose Mendoza's precise dedication to defending his title with his reserved style left him unable to fathom a reckless boxer like Joe, making him see Joe as a monster and undoubtedly damaging Jose mentally as his boxing match became akin to psychological torture rather than the contest he was expecting. He won the fight, but has undoubtedly become permanently scarred by the monstrous image of Joe standing up from the canvas and charging at him like a wild animal again and again and again. And finally, Joe's last moments signify in its most extreme yet symbolic way that boxing and sport in general always presents dualities. Joe's brutal fight with Jose Mendoza greatly accelerated his deteriorating condition, and to boot he had lost the fight and was unable to take the title from Jose. Yet Joe died satisfied with his life and his great fight. He didn't die in agony or with major regrets. He felt he had done everything he needed to do. He fought everyone he wanted to fight, and in a few short years he went from a vagrant to a respected boxer with great friends who loved him, a great trainer, and a lasting legacy in the world. Joe had very little skills or ambitions outside of the world of boxing, but boxing had cemented the name Joe Yabuki in the consciousness of the world, and gave Joe a life that he was able to be proud of. He accomplished something. He had a purpose. His life on Earth was validated. Perhaps that scene back in the first season where Joe silently cried showcased that his greatest fear may have been dying without anyone knowing who he was, without having worth in anyone's minds or hearts. Through boxing, he achieved the life he never thought he'd have, and maybe to him all the trials were worth it. That's why I find it important that Joe did not die laying on his back, but dignified, sitting in his corner, inside of a boxing ring, surrounded by everyone who loved him and the thousands who admired him as a boxer. His moment of death perfectly captured the definition of Joe's time in the world. A reckless, yet beloved boxer. Thank you for watching.
"俺たちの